although I would push back on the fact that these have their origin in religious precepts, because there are biological realities that determine or limit your ability to do certain things efficiently. And efficiency.
No, I'm saying a lot of the social and cultural expectations are influenced by
influence, not an origin,
not determined. Well, no, but they're influenced by thousands of years old presuppositions about what it means to be a man and a woman in God's eyes in some traditions, right? And that's true in the West. That's definitely true in the West. It's not that it's the sole determining factor. It's just that it's influenced by it, particularly in the United States of America, dude.
I think it became more sophisticated through the lens of religious practice.
It may be in certain ways, but in other ways, not so much, right? Because our religious understanding of the world was pre-science. So
I understand that, but
there's a lot of clashes to our understanding now.
But science doesn't tell you how to value things. It doesn't tell you how to behave. That's not the answer.
Science can inform, but science can inform those kinds of questions.
Sure, but those questions are subjective.
Definitively answer them. The questions aren't subjective. What do you mean?
Those questions are value. Value is objective.
Yes, there is an objective component to values. Otherwise, how could you?
No.
How would you understand moral precepts unless you had some kind of objectivity to moral values?
No. Value in itself, like what you consider to be important, what you consider to be valuable, what you consider to be unvaluable. That is
what an individual subject considers valuable is subjective, but value full stop, I wouldn't say is inherent.
You're jumping ahead as far as moral values. I'm talking about value. Which actually undergirds moral values later on. But if we're talking about what someone considers,
a whole segment of philosophy called axiology, I believe it's the theory of value, what the nature of value is. And what I'm telling you is that there are conceptions of value, full stop, apart from moral value, whereby it's not the best way to it's not obvious that the best way to understand that the nature of that kind of thing is that it is inherently subjective, is my point. That's a view.
So you're saying that there is an objective value, for example, like an objective.
I'm saying that there is a conception of value whereby it makes sense to talk about it having an objective component.
Which is?
So like that water is valuable to human beings in general would be hard to say is inherently subjective, unless you mean subjective in a more abstract sense, not as an individual subject, but as subjects writ large that are of the type of human being. But anytime you talk in generalities, it becomes really weird. It's a weird conception of subjectivity. So that might be a quick example just off the top of my head. But like the fact that creatures that need water to that degree, objectively speaking, that the foundation of their valuing that substance is objective, kind of implies a kind of objectivity to their value, or an objectivity to why they confer value on that substance. Right?
So we're talking about human beings as an abstract group rather than an individual human being, where we know
that's my point. But there
are people.
Unless you're talking about, unless you're talking about an individual, it doesn't really make sense to talk. If you're talking about value writ large, unless you're talking about an individual subject, it doesn't make sense to talk about value as inherently subjective. That's my point. So if you're talking about a group of people, right, or a group of beings, right, it doesn't even have to be one type of being. It can be like all of the animals on the planet Earth, like Earth beings, like that. Those kinds of beings value water or confer a certain kind of value on oxygen or something like that, given their physical makeup. Like it's weird to talk about value in subjective terms like that when you're being general. But that was my only point. But go ahead.
No, I get you. But just to that, also, it's like, why are diamonds more expensive than water when they're completely more necessary than
water is more.
Water is much more necessary than diamonds. It's like to human beings, like water is far more important than diamonds, but it costs a lot more, which is what we use to determine, how much we value something within an economy.
Yeah, but the reason why is because it's way more abundant. So if diamonds were as abundant as water, diamonds wouldn't cost that much either.
But that's what I'm saying. But also, if nobody wanted diamonds, they wouldn't cost that much either.
Yeah.
It's like,
you know how abundant water is on this planet, bro.
No, I get you. But that's what I'm saying. Like there is a relationship between not only like how common something is, but also how many people want it. Because
Yeah,
if water becomes useful for other things other
yeah,
than just drinking,
yeah.
it will absolutely because the supply is going to be starting to be more stressed by a higher demand for other purposes,
Yeah,
which
but
are not.
in fact, water is valuable for other purposes besides just drinking it. But yeah,
No, I
you're
get
right.
that, but if as more and more, if like for example, we found
No,
out that
I
things
understand your point. I'm
yeah,
agreeing
yeah,
with
yeah,
you. I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing.
like it will also change the value. It would raise the value of water and on its own. If we found a
Right,
way, if we found,
okay.
but and also if we're gonna like we're talking about value, and it can really only be interpreted on the individual level. Like the group is an abstract either way, there's going to be variation within a group. It's like just like you were saying earlier, it's variations between someone's like propensity to commit crime or whatever it may be, even within men or women, or between men.
That
No, hold on a
doesn't make
second. Let me
sense,
finish
man.
my sentence. What's it called? There is a difference in how much someone values water for their own consumption from one person to the other. There
Yeah,
are
I agree.
people, you will hear people
I
say, "Oh,
agree.
I don't like to drink water."
I
They'll
agree.
drink other things,
I agree.
but to say that as a human race, just because it is necessary as part of our biology, and we can replace it with other things, people get it from fruits or whatever it may be. But as a human race, that is an abstract category. Even within a
Okay.
religion,
So, but
each
value is
and
an
every
abstraction
hold on a
too.
second, but even in a what's it called? Yeah, but we're talking about groups of people acting on this abstract concept. Like let's talk about individual people that make up a religion, that make up a belief system, whatever it may
Why do
be.
we have to talk about individuals? Why can't we talk about abstract groups?
Because action happens at the individual level. The core the
Action,
collection, yeah, like the basic unit of action happens at the individual
the
level.
basic unit of action. So action is an abstraction too, and action in general happens at multiple levels. There's not one level to understand action. You can
But where does it
understand human
start?
action in general. You can understand human action on an individual basis. You can understand
So,
human action in the
but
past.
but
You can
but
understand human action in the
but
future.
Jason, without
There's not one way to
individual,
analyze action
without
as
no no,
as
but
a concept.
without the analysis of the individual, you can't even abstract to a higher level. It's like the individual makes
Dude,
up that is the basic unit of
you
it.
could talk about action happening in a certain part of your body with respect to your biological mechanisms. Like your heart pumping could be abstracted as an action that is taking place in
Sure,
your
and
body
so
right
can an
now.
atom
And
even.
your neuron firings in certain parts of your brain can be taken as action happening in your body.
Sure, that's fine,
My only point that undermines the point you're trying to make is that there's different levels at which
that's
to talk
fine.
about action. You could talk about action happening at the level of quantum realities, bro. Like what? Like action is actually every bit as much abstract as you think groups of people are, if not more.
For example, is that like a conscious decision? For example, with intent,
Is what?
we're talking
Heart
about.
beating?
Yeah,
No,
we're
it's not
talking about.
voluntary.
Yeah, we're talking about action in the terms of human beings acting with intention based on what they believe.
No, you okay, so maybe that's what you intended, but what
But
you evoked was the concept of action. And what I'm saying
yeah,
is
but
there's
but
not
that's
one way to
but
understand that
Jason,
concept.
I obviously wasn't going to the subatomic level with this, and we're talking about a very specific context here,
Ibrahima,
which is
please,
value.
please try your
No,
best to
hold
get
on,
my
no,
point.
hold on.
I'm not
But
accusing
I haven't
you.
even
I'm not
finished my
wait,
points.
wait,
I
wait,
know, but I'm
but
not.
you're misunderstanding me. Let me just say this.
But we're
I'm not
going
accusing
into a
you. Wait,
pedantic
let me be
definition
clear,
of it
dude. Let me be
when.
clear real quick.
Oh
I'm not
man,
accusing you or attributing to you falsely anything you don't actually think. The point of bringing up those examples was to illustrate a point I'm making. The point I'm making is that there's a whole bunch of different ways to talk about action precisely because it is abstract. There's not one way or one default way to talk about action, which is what you're saying. That's what I'm denying.
that well,
That there's
you're
only one
implying
way
this.
or there's a default way to talk about action,
I was
which is at
talking
the level of
about.
individual
I'm talking
choices.
about. Yeah, where did we start with this? We were talking about religious values
Yes.
and
And
the
you said that it's
origin
inherently
of.
subjective.
It's inherently subjective
Yes.
because and I'm talking about science versus religion and the questions that they're asking, and they're asking
Okay.
questions that are subjective, like
Okay.
what the best type of behavior is or the best thing to value is, because
Uh,
there are religions like mine, for example, where like material reality in itself is something that we do not value as much as the afterlife. As a matter of
right.
fact, it specifically talks about the fact that the Jannah, which is our word for the afterlife, heaven, you must put that over the dunya, which is earth, the material reality. This is not something that you can objectively derive from measuring things. This is a completely subjective value.
Then on what basis is the moral force that you ought or you must value that thing over this life come from, then, if it's not objective?
Well, actually, it is a decree within the religion from God Himself. Like, this is something that God Himself says in the Quran, that this is something that is temporary.
But if God said it, how could it not be objective? Like, okay, if it's a moral prescription from God, how could it not be objective?
No, but that's the thing. It's like, do you believe or not? Like, you have belief, and that's faith within that what's it called? Within that belief system.
I understand faith as a form of Christian, but
I get that.
my point is,
but the whole point of faith is believing in something that you cannot tangibly prove. I don't know if you have some other definition of faith. Otherwise, that would just be objectively
I take
pointing
your
at something.
definition. I take your definition. I'm not denying your definition at all. I agree with it. But what I'm trying to point out is, according to your own presuppositions religiously, and Christians have an analogous one, if you don't believe the thing that is regarded by the faith to be true, then you're wrong and you're subject to all kinds of eternal penalties. Right?
Well, within if that does happen, well, which is I think we call it like shirk, which is like denying or like believing in other things other than God. You will very likely meet a very sore end in the afterlife. But that's something that I still have faith in.
I understand that.
I don't get how that switches.
True though, that it has to have some objectivity to it, dude. Like,
but point to it, please.
I can't point to it. Your whole point about faith is that it's
hold up.
But my point is, and that's interesting to me because you spent a whole bunch of energy talking about falsifiability in the context of climate change. But I'm gonna leave that alone. But like what I'm fundamentally trying to get you to understand, I understand it better than you. But here's the point I'm making. I don't want to get distracted with that.
But hold on.
Let me underscore the point. Let me underscore. Dude, you were done talking. Stop it. Let me. You can have the last word. You can have the last word. You can have the last word. Let me just finish this point. You can go after me. You can have the last word. Let me finish the point. The point I'm making is you're operating under religious presuppositions, taking faith into account. You believe that it is the case. In faith, you believe it. Without being able to prove it, you believe it. But you believe that it is the case. That if you violate certain moral dictates by God or Allah, that there are certain kinds of penalties, eternal damnation penalties, type penalties that you are subject to. And if you abide by them, which is why praying 5 times a day and all of the other religious prescriptions that come from your faith, that's part of why you do that, then you are subject to all kinds of eternal rewards, right? If you believe that, if you take that for granted, even on faith, right? How could you not understand that to be objective in any sense? Either it's objectively the case or it's not, right?
Is objectively the case that we believe this?
No, it's objectively the content of your belief either is objectively the case or it is not.
Oh my, okay. So I don't understand how you're making the connection between objective reality and measurable reality, things that no matter what you believe can be shown. Like, I don't understand how you're making that point with something that I cannot prove, which is my faith. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? It's like, if you're saying objectivity, if you have to be able to measure and demonstrate it no matter who believes it. That is the whole point of science.
Things can be true. You could have an inability to measure something and it can still be true. So in the age of pre-science, before we developed the technological capacities, for example,
and demonstrate.
Okay, so in pre-science era, before we had the ability or the capacity technologically to measure a whole bunch of things we can measure now, presumably we couldn't measure any of that shit. Yet it still had an independent objective reality, though, which is what enabled us. Which is what enabled us to discover it in the first place. Once we developed the technological capacity to measure it, bruh, that's the point. So, if you're believing that something exists on faith, so if you're believing that something exists or there's an objective reality concerning theology or matters of God on faith, right? It's either objectively true, the content of your belief, or it's not. There's still objectivity implied by that, dude. That's the only point I'm making. This is a very simple point I'm
Okay.
trying to make.
And again, you keep cutting this out where I said measure or demonstrate. It's like whether or not we were able to measure
I
gravity
didn't cut
or
that out.
gravitational
I
force.
spoke specifically to that point.
No,
What
but
do you mean?
Hold on a second. Whether we were able to measure it or not, or how much gravity impacts the Earth, or how much gravity pulls down, as far as like the forces that it pulls, what's it called, objects to the ground with, you could still drop an apple and show anyone, whether they believed you or not, that the apple would fall if you let it go.
Okay.
I cannot do that with my faith per se. I can make reasonable arguments about it, depending on depending on the subject. I can make like reasoning argument as
So
to
your
why
faith is
stuff.
unfalsifiable?
That is actually the definition of faith. Like
So your faith is unfalsifiable?
Yeah, that's what that means.
Okay.
Like
You still believe
it? Yeah, that's called faith. That's what that means. Like that's literally what that means. It's like the whole point of the falsifiability principle is that if you are designing an experiment, you are going into it assuming your hypothesis might be wrong, and you are going to design an experiment which will prove your hypothesis wrong. So therefore, you're going to say, well, if this happens, then that means my hypothesis is wrong. And in the context of climate change, you have yet to show me something that is like, wow, if this happens, that means my hypothesis is wrong. Like that,
I showed you several things. So
really,
okay, I don't want to go back to climate change.
But I'm not trying to go by the point of climate change. But the point is, like there are things that are unfalsifiable, and there are things that what's it called? You cannot prove objectively. You absolutely can't. It's like there's no point at which,
like the inexistence of God.
Excuse me. Yeah,
like the inexistence of God.
Like God's existence.
Have I demonstrated I understand what falsifiable means now, since I came up with that example and not you?
I mean, that's what I've been saying this entire time, but you came up with that example. Seriously?
I literally
just said, I literally just talked about for a few minutes how like the literally religion and values of religion are unfalsifiable. Like what
you never mentioned the inexistence of God as an example.
Okay,
before,
that's
right?
fine. Okay.
Cool. So have I demonstrated I understand falsifiability now? So now you can't accuse me of not understanding it.
In this context, sure.
Okay, I just want you to concede some stuff. Okay, so here's the thing. We're gonna go back. We're gonna go back to Jim.
But I actually never even got to my original point. Like we've been having this.
What is your original point?
My original point was about individual decision making and individual beliefs. How those things are driven by values that are subjective and that change drastically depending on what you believe. And these things are not the same thing as like for example, as far as what we can tell to the best of our knowledge is true through scientific objective measurement. Those things don't really ask the same questions, and which is like, what should you value? Like, what do you think should be the best way to behave towards your in-laws, for example? It's like, is that a question that science necessarily is able to measure? This is the best way. There aren't
the question of what should you value is not a question that scientists can answer. They can only inform that question.
But that's the value judgment.
The question of what do people value is clearly an observable thing, and science has a lot to say about that.
But that's not the. But you can measure that. You can ask somebody what they value, but you can't. You can't say
which is part
like, what should you?
Which is part of what makes values generally objective. That's my point. So there's an instantiation of objective. There's an objective instantiation of what. There's an objective instantiation of what things are valued. Right. Right. Okay. So that's an example of a component of values writ large that is objective, which was the only point I was making. You're talking about values as if the only way to understand them. Hold on, I'm almost done.
No.
You're talking about values as if the only way to understand them is that they're inherently subjective. And my pushback was, there's a whole bunch of different ways to understand values, and a lot of them encompass objective presuppositions. They wouldn't even be intelligible to us unless we assume some type of objectivity to them. That's my point.
But you made that point to get at what?
I made that point to undermine the claim that you were making, which is that there's only one way to understand these things. You're talking about abstract concepts that can be understood and analyzed in a whole bunch of different ways.
Hold on a second. You're talking about something that I never even said. You're saying that that's the only way that I can
literally.
No, hold on,
You
stop.
said the
No,
final
but Jason,
analysis
let me
of
talk.
values. Dude,
Jason,
I have it recorded.
what values are to people? Like the fact that people have values is something that you can measure. What the best value is not something you can measure.
Okay, I already agreed with
Can
that.
you do? So then we're going on a pedantic point for absolutely no reason.
Okay. Well, part of the reason is because you didn't articulate what you meant very well, and also part of the reason because you made claims that were false. But whatever, that's fine. If you want to just move off of it, we can. Because actually, I want to go back to gender.
But that's what I'm talking about.
Like, and you got to go soon.
Yeah. Either way, my entire point actually didn't even hinge on whether or not we could measure people having values or not having values. My whole point was about religion and the fact that there was a sophistication of those expectations that are
gender
expectations through religion.
Okay.
By redefining what is the best way to behave if you are this, what is the best way to behave if you are that. It's like these are things that people value as the best way to do something. That is subjective, is it not?
Individuals valuing things this or that way is subjective for sure.
So it's like, sure, there are expectations that are put on males at large, because that's like, once people start to like agree like, hey, this might be the best way to do things, like that is a social component of any sort of complex social hierarchy. You start to meld values together. At least they at least overlap in a certain way, and religion very much helps with that. Does it not?
Religion impacts the overall dimensions of what you're talking about on a societal scale. To say that religion helps it is to turn a blind eye to all of the ways in which religious presuppositions and tenets have actually exacerbated certain kinds of tensions that have caused a lot of kinds of conflicts throughout human history.
I mean, the same thing.
A lot of wars, in fact, a lot of wars can break out that are sparked by conflicts and values. In fact, you have people talking increasingly in the United States context about the prospects of another American Civil War in virtue of the culture wars, in virtue of what seem to be irresolvable conflicts in sets of values, right?
I mean, same thing can be said with any sort of belief system, whether it be measured objectively or not.
I agree.
Like,
the only point I'm making,
for example, phrenology,
we don't have time for you to elaborate like this, dude.
Yeah, but
just trying to make
but we went off on.
I don't need you to give me the answer for phrenology. The only point I'm trying to make is very simple. Okay, it's not quite accurate to say that religion has only helped and has not actually added to the harms.
But Jason,
that's my point.
Jason, that's not even a point I'm making. Like, I'm not even saying that it only helped. Like, you're going completely
so then you agree?
past. But Jason, obviously.
Okay, cool. So then you don't have to give me a rebuttal. So I want to go back to gender now.
But I was going towards there, and you deviated me again.
I didn't deviate you. I responded to what you said. You said a sentence. You stopped talking. I started talking. That's how this works.
I look. My whole point is that there was an increase in sophistication as to what a man or a woman is, what their purpose is, and what the best way of going about their lives is, and that is a subjective thing. I said nothing about religion hurting, not ever hurting anybody or whatever.
I'm gonna. Oh God, go ahead,
dude. I've been trying to get at this for like 20 minutes. When you're talking about what's it called? Like, this is a counterclaim on their part. The fact that there shouldn't be any sort of boundaries as to what someone can consider the purpose of their life is and the way they live their lives, based on just what they were, the equipment they were born with, for lack of a better word, their biology. This is something that is subjective. You're allowed to do that. Like no one really can force you to view yourself only within those boundaries. But the point that they're making is that not only do they, like you yourself, you're able to like not see yourself within those boundaries, but you have to get other people to view you somewhere else within those boundaries. And that in itself is part of the treatment, which is why they change themselves aesthetically. Because if you didn't want other people to also view you as someone who can just shift anywhere and everywhere, you wouldn't change aesthetically. It would just be an internal feeling, which would then be, change the way you express yourself or whatever, and you wouldn't care what other people think. Like that social component of other people viewing you is part of the dysphoria. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like you're meeting those expectations, and you want other people to recognize that you've met those expectations.
But that's an overly simplistic way of describing the variations of how gender dysphoria manifests itself for various different trans and non-binary people. It doesn't always take the form of a person deciding that they want to change their what you keep calling the aesthetics of their body to fit certain preconceived notions of what a particular kind of gendered body looks like. There are people who are perfectly fine living life the way that they are in terms of like not altering their bodies at all. But for the forms of discrimination and persecution they will get, because people are going to look at them and then make all kinds of assumptions about what their pronouns are, all kinds of assumptions about what their behavioral patterns are, all kinds of assumptions about even maybe their sexual proclivities, all kinds of assumptions that may not fit the individual in question. And so there's an undeniable social pressure in virtue of a lot of these presuppositions related to gender identity that are very often not questioned, and that people based on which people operate in the world. And so that actually undergirds the social pressure to do the kinds of things that these people otherwise wouldn't even want to do. It would be a lot easier, for example, if I want to be taken seriously as a woman, to not look the way I actually look right now, because a lot of people are going to see this aesthetic and they're going to think male, and that's triggering to me if I'm experiencing a certain kind of gender dysphoria and I genuinely think of myself as a woman. That's what that's the kind of that's the kind of issue at play here. And so it's not merely about the aesthetic change. It's more like, given that it's way easier for me to undergo bottom surgeries and things like that than it is to change all of the presuppositions of society, then that seems like I'm relegated to that only as a recourse, right? Also, part of what people try to do is do the slow but sure chipping away at those unexamined assumptions, which they consider biological determinism, which they think of as an inherently oppressive ideology or set of ideas, let's say, that certain biological realities determine your gender identity. What they're saying is actually gender doesn't work that way. That's one of their core contingents. That a person can identify as a woman and not have the relevant biological realities that we typically associate with that. Okay. That's what they're trying to argue. So it's not quite, your articulation of their position is not quite accurate either. And then the other thing that I want to go back to, and I'm almost done because I know you got to go. The other thing I want to go back to is, it's not quite accurate to say that religion specifically has made a more sophisticated conception of what our expectations are around men and women, because precisely the contention of a lot of the people that I'm attempting to steelman and describe is that actually religion has done the most damage in terms of influencing our social expectations around what a man and a woman even are in the first place, that are counter to science and scientific realities, and all of the studies that they cite that are around the differences in the relationship between gender and biology, or gender and sex. Like that, their whole contention is actually religion has made this worse, and we need to undo that. There's a whole bunch of ways that they would argue that it has. The main point, because we don't have time to get into the specifics, but I'll give you one example. I'll give you one example. So the idea that man was made in God's image, right?
That's not part of my religion.
There's a certain kind of what?
That's actually something we completely deny in my religion.
Okay, fine, but it's still a religious precept that has influenced our conception of gender in this country, though, because Islam is not the only like. First of all, I don't even know that Islam is like one of the biggest religious influencers. It seems like Christianity and Judaism are bigger than Islam in this country. But regardless, the point I'm making is the only point I'm trying to make is that that's an
civil law in
example
Europe
of a
actually
religious
came from
precept.
Islamic law.
That's an example of a religious precept that undergirds a whole bunch of social and cultural milieu around what the expectations of a man's role in life is, that he has to be the breadwinner and that the woman has to be the caretaker, and that particular conception of gender roles has been instantiated and inculcated in our society for decades, bro.
So that didn't exist before Christianity?
Of course, no, yeah, of course it did in various different ways, but it didn't look the same. But my point is that it's influenced our conceptions in the modern age.
No, but hold on. It didn't look the same in what way?
It didn't look the same in a lot of different ways. So, for example, one of the practices that were associated with the pre-Christian age of Judaism was like polyamory. But what is it when you marry multiple people? Polygamy. Like that practice has been mostly condemned in our modern context, but like that would have been perfectly fine back in Christian days. In fact, there are many figures in the Bible who had
back
multiple wives in like Christian times.
But like, when is that? What are you talking about?
Like the time, well, also pre-Christian times that are mentioned in the Bible. So like, which comes from the Old Testament. So the times of the Israelites or the Hebrews or whatever. I don't know if I'm using the right terminology for that. And then like when Christianity had its heyday in the medieval period, I remember that like Christianity was really huge. And then I don't know exactly what time period the inception of like when Christianity first became kind of like a major religion. I know Byzantium is part of that in the medieval period, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, Byzantine was what's it called, post the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So that was like
okay. So the Holy Roman Empire as well is a part of it. Yeah, but
I don't. Go ahead. The Holy Roman Empire came about in the 1100s.
Okay, fine. So take that. But my point is like those have influenced the way in the West that we think of these gender roles. Is my point. That's all I'm trying to say.
No, but what my point is, like, those gender roles very likely, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find what's it called, like examples of those conceptions that didn't go past, well, at least that didn't exist Christianity. It's like we have examples of this, and from even back in like Babylonian
I agree.
But that's my entire point. To say that it is only, sure, that is the main belief system that came about in the West, but the expectations of men and women behaving a certain way, being just biological determinism and being only coming from like religious conceptions, I don't think is completely true.
That's not what I said. What I'm saying, oh my God, I'm saying that there are certain presuppositions about expectations regarding men and women that have been influenced by religion that a lot of the people left of center who actually sincerely hold these views would point to and say they've actually made things worse, not better. Your contention was that religion has made it more sophisticated and some shit. And what I'm saying is that's a highly controversial and biased claim.
From a pre-religion, from a pre-religious conception of what's it called? A pre-religious conception of life and purpose, going from, like, for example, like a primitive sort of social hierarchy where there were most definitely expectations depending on your gender or your sex. Actually, religion has made that more sophisticated, and that was my point. And the whole point I'm saying this is because it refined what the actions of a man would need to be in order to exist within a certain social hierarchy. Whereas what I'm talking about
is like a hunter-gatherer society, for example.
Yeah, something like that, for example. Whereas there were much more, and as far as the anthropological studies that I've seen on this, there were much less differences, and we see this as well in like really primitive cultures that still exist today. There are less differences in like the roles that people play within a tribe, just because of necessity and survivability. Like, you'll see a lot more occurrences of women doing certain things that would usually be regarded as like a male only what's it called?
Yeah,
And what I'm saying is religion in itself has refined and sophisticated those roles to specifically like take advantage more efficiently of what each population is actually capable of. And that has come along with what's it called, like social development, well, at least technological development and social development over millennia. Like, I don't think that's a controversial thing to say at all. And
I mean, if
my whole point
comparison
is
is like Neanderthals or like hunter
not
gatherer, like
Neanderthals, but we have
primitive human societies, and
no. I mean,
religion is
look
a
at
step up over that. Okay, fine, but like we're
we have
talking about
examples
comparing
of
like
people
the
that are alive
Byzantium
today.
fucking medieval times age to like now in 2022, and so some people might argue that actually a lot of these old fashioned religious precepts and ideals haven't changed with the times. As our makeup and the nature of our interaction has changed, like you need to keep up. And so it's a lot less
Sure,
obvious now why having some kind of social expectation that prohibits men to lie with men, as in the Sodom and Gomorrah days mentioned in the Bible, for example, makes sense now in 2022 versus during a time where we didn't understand how sexually transmitted diseases work. There was a huge reliance in terms of the way that certain societies organized that made it really, really, really important for men to have certain roles in that context of that society, etc. Like when all of those realities change, but yet the moral precepts around what human beings are expected to do based on gender don't change. Some people would say that that's a fair criticism, and that to that extent, religion has actually not made things more sophisticated. It has actually halted progress, and that is actually the kind of argument that these people make.
Okay, if we're talking about halting progress as having actually defined and what's it called, like there are certain axioms that are actually being reasoned from within that belief system, and having those axioms and those axioms not changing. And if they did change, it would be something different. As a matter of fact, it would be a different religion. It's like that's not really much of a what's it called. It's not that it's halting it as much as it is preserving certain axioms that it believes to be true within it. It's like when we're talking about this progress per se, we're exploring new axioms and then coming and deducing new values from them, which is what these people are saying essentially. Like, okay, so if we're starting from a standpoint that, for example, gay marriage is not bad, what can we then deduce? Then it is, if you come from that axiom, then you can actually deduce like, well, keeping people from doing it is immoral, right? Or harming people for doing it
Yeah, but
is immoral.
I don't think they start
It,
there. I think they start by asking the question, on what basis can we hold gay marriage to be bad in the first place? They start by questioning the presuppositions of the religious tenets that's preceded it historically, not just arbitrarily declaring
well,
it okay.
of course. I mean, but look, we're talking about a period in time, like as far as the recency of like, what's it called, infant mortality and the occurrences of like death in pregnancy and such. Fertility has been something that's like the basis for some other religions, to be honest. Like that, like, this is not a trivial thing, and for
I
someone
don't
to
think
actually, no, but for someone to infer that uh, the the ban on gay marriage in that period, based on the realities that they were facing, was something that was like just straight up out of the ether or just hatefulness. I think that's like a misunderstanding of like what human beings do and why they do them. It's like
I agree. I
if you are
agree.
facing like extinction from not
Yeah, I agree.
only the
I agree.
outside but also your fertility,
I
there are
agree.
certain things that you will do to try to ensure your survivability.
I
And
agree.
a certain type of behavior which has it's not I'm not just trying to get you to agree. I'm trying to express the full thought. Like
You're
the certain
pontificating, bro.
no, but there are people going to be watching this. But I want them to understand what I'm saying. The whole point is like if there are certain behaviors that you observe to be less likely to ensue in your societal progress or in your even like survivability, it would it would entail certain restrictions or certain expectations or certain ideals per se. It's
Yeah.
like
I get it. There are a whole bunch of what people may rightly or justly or unjustly describe as old-fashioned, antiquated, or even barbaric practices back then that made more sense back then, given the state of technology, given the state of human existence back then, that don't make much sense now. And it's precisely that I'm trying to draw your attention to, because that undergirds a lot of the conceptions or perceptions that a lot of the religious values and precepts that a lot of traditional people, traditionalist type people, which typically are on the conservative right of center side, hold on to as gospel for all of the usual religious reasons, right? What a lot of the quote unquote progressive types are trying to point out is that a lot of that stuff doesn't like apply anymore. And so we need to reevaluate our value systems in light of all of our modernizations.
Well, who's we?
Human beings, our society, human beings in our society in general.
But that's the thing. It's like, how are you to decide that we will reevaluate our values? I don't think that's something you can
but they
really
could
do.
flip that on you and go, who are you to decide that we have to like stay true to all of these old ass values and ways
Who's
of living?
we?
Human
I don't care
beings
what you
in
do.
our society.
But that's the thing. We don't operate as human beings as a society. We operate in
if
cooperation
a
as
gay person,
individuals.
If a gay person before Obergefell wanted to marry someone of the same sex, there were a whole bunch of societal restrictions against it.
Not societal.
Yet legally they could not do it.
Yes,
that's
the
part
government.
of society. Is the government not part of society?
That's the state. The
is
state
the,
and
the
its
state
people are
not
the
a
same.
part of a society, Ibrahima?
Sure, that's fine. So some societies have
societal.
states. Hold on.
Societal.
Hold on a second. Look, can we be more careful about this, or can we?
Dude,
are you just gonna?
It's
No, hold
gonna
on a
be
second.
immaterial to the point I just made.
So
you're about to be
actually,
pedantic
yes.
according to your own standards.
No, actually, so a society cannot exist without a state.
Of course, it can.
So, is it inherently part of society, or is it a feature?
I never said it was.
In our,
it's a feature in our actual society.
It's a feature in our society,
and I'm trying
to tell you, like, we can have a societal conception of this that doesn't involve the state whatsoever.
Not if we're talking about reality, because we actually have a state in our society, right?
Oh my God.
Right.
But the whole issue,
what I was talking about. I'm talking about reality. I'm not talking about hypothetically living in a society that doesn't have a fucking government. I'm talking about right now in the status quo.
But if we're talking about reality, go on a what's it called, on an Indian reservation and try to apply federal law there. It doesn't apply. They have their own justice system.
Dude. That's immaterial to the point I'm making. It doesn't matter what you do.
What? But dude, it does actually. It does. But my whole entire point is that if the crux of that issue is that the state is intervening within a what's it called? Within a consensual association between two people. The state is, right? It's not people. It's not people walking around on the street.
Because it wasn't against the law.
It's not people walking around the street.
Well, there were those too, because they were protesting the overturning of those laws.
Were they going around like physically stopping? No. Can I finish my sentence, or are you going to tell me what I'm going to say?
Well, I'm kind of losing my patience because you're interrupting me for dumb reasons and making points that are immaterial to the point I'm making, and they're not refuting it at all. And all you're going to do is say that you didn't say X, Y, and Z, and you're going to end up agreeing with me anyway.
If I say something, is it just for the purpose of refuting you, or am I trying to add nuance?
Okay, but you interrupted me to make a point that's irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make right now. That's frustrating, dude.
All I said was that it's not necessarily part of what a society is if it doesn't include the state. Like, the state itself is the issue. It's like we can have societies that have completely differing values.
Fine,
like I've already conceded that.
Can I make my point now?
So then what was the whole point of that?
Okay, so my point is that we live in a society in which before Obergefell, individuals who wanted to get married to people of the same sex couldn't, because there were a whole bunch of societal barriers, i.e. laws that prohibited it. You tried to make it seem like it wasn't a part of society because it was the government. It's like, what? Governments are part of the society, dude. What? I don't understand. Like, that was dumb. That was a waste of time, and we don't have that much left. So like, that's what's frustrating.
So hold on a second. Hold on.
All right, I'm gonna ignore you now because I want to make a point that I've been trying to make for a while. And so here's the point I'm trying to make right now. So I wanted to do this a long time ago, but you kept pontificating about random shit. Gender dysphoria, I wanted to define it from the DSM-5. Because we never find it when you brought it up. A concept designated in the DSM-5 as clinically significant distress or impairment related to gender incongruence, which may include desire to change primary and or secondary sex characteristics. Not all transgender or gender diverse people experience gender dysphoria. I wanted to make that clear because you were talking about gender dysphoria as though it were uniform in terms of the experience of people. It was a point I made earlier, but I wanted to underscore it. I'll probably end up editing this and putting this where it's supposed to be, but I just wanted to make sure that I got to that before you ran out of time. And then the last thing I'm going to ask you, because I know you got to go, is when it comes to that scathing review of What is a Woman, the individual who was criticizing Matt Walsh seems to be getting at something we've been talking about, and this I think would be a great place to end with, which is the extent to which religion actually doesn't make things better, but makes things worse in terms of this entire discourse. That a lot of what people left of center and people who are not religious would view as antiquated presuppositions or ideas around what the proper gender roles for men and women are, indeed what it even makes sense to consider a man or a woman, are actually more religiously influenced than meets the eye. And so when you have a documentary like people like Matt Walsh's documentary, that there's a kind of interesting question about the extent to which those religious precepts are being smuggled into the documentary and operating kind of on a base level, on a non-explicit level. And it is precisely those religious presuppositions that undergird the idea that, in some sense, transgenderism is illegitimate, and that what trans people really are men pretending to be women and women pretending to be men and nothing else. What do you say to that?
I say to that there are definitely to say that they're just antiquated and unhelpful ways of conceptualizing the roles of men and women is essentially assuming that they're like the way that was set up was almost in a I guess antiquated, it kind of like qualifies that, but to say that there are realities that no longer exist at all that would be usefully served by having your purpose defined by that identity, which I think is really the purpose of an identity, like to define how you behave and the way you do things, the way you carry yourself, the way you expect to behave, the way you expect to live your life or whatever. To say that the realities are so different now that those things cannot apply and that they're almost harmful, I think is in itself a value judgment, and also in certain ways subjective, not always. There are certain things, like for example, we touched on it as far as like the legal implications of choosing to do certain things, which essentially is enforced by a state rather than by individuals per se. If you aren't able to explore for yourself what that may be, I do see that as a problem. If you are living in a society that does consider itself to be free, but the actual critique of religion in itself having like harmed per se, I think there's a lot more to be considered before you can make that as a definitive judgment. Do you understand what I mean? It's like there are certain things that are considered to be antiquated just because people would say in general, like, I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be this way. But that's usually without considering second and third order consequences of certain behaviors. And that's something that I see that undergirds a lot of those ideologies, which is I don't see any reason why I shouldn't do it. Therefore, we should be able to do it freely. And to say that you shouldn't do it is actually just oppression.
Yeah, I mean, I understand you. I don't think that's accurate. I think that there's a valid critique of religion and the extent to which religious precepts have influenced our common understanding now in the West generally, particularly coming from conservatives, around what our social expectations for men and women are. I think that we can ground a lot of them in kind of rationality and basic biological realities, but the extent to which we can do that without running afoul or becoming guilty of various forms of unjust discrimination or oppression of certain people who don't quite fit nicely into those boxes is actually a fair thing to investigate. And I think that the people who are critical of the kind of traditional conceptions of gender that we have a point, and I'm willing to go that far with them. I think that some of the claims that they make are ridiculous, and they come really, really close to denying basic, easily verifiable realities of biology. In order to underscore, I think, the part that of their contentions that are actually valid, which is that the ways in which you organize a society are not necessarily the most attentive to various forms of oppression that befall specifically trans and non-binary people. But some of them go so far as to say that basic facts of reality are transphobic, and I think that that's stupid. So I'm kind of in the middle somewhat. I tried to give voice to the parts. Well, I tried to give voice to all of it, and still, man, all of it. But there's certain parts I actually genuinely agree with, and I tried to give voice to those in the end.